Welcome to a new episode of Measurement Mashup, the podcast on data-driven decisions in communication. Here we are addressing interesting topics about measuring the effectiveness of communications. The podcast is for everyone working in corporate communications, but also for everyone interested in learning about how communications can and should be measured and how communications helps to increase the position of communications department in the eye of top management. My name is Stefan Rufenach, and virtual with me is Marc-Steffen Buchele and our guest.
I'm Marc-Steffen Buchele, and this is our first episode in English. The others we did in German, but we made English summaries on the topics we discussed there. For example, what communication controlling is all about, where you can use it and what you have to keep in mind to deal with it. Or another topic we already discussed, what makes good reporting and what we think of dashboards. You can find all this on measurementmashup.de, and we will continue to do so in future. We will provide summaries of the episodes in the other language on our website. Today, the focus will be on stakeholder opinions and how we can best capture them. This brings us to the central level of impact of communication activities, where you can really prove or find out what corporate communications activities have achieved in stakeholders' minds, what knowledge, opinion, and thinking they have, and how best to capture this. This is the topic that we want to discuss today.
Yes, that's right. And of this podcast, we will always touch upon the different levels of measurement, starting with the basics like views, click rates, which tells me whether I'm visible with my communication, whether I reach my audience with my communications. But then at the very end is the most important question, and that will always be, what did I achieve in terms of changing perception or changing behavior? So basically, we need to look into people's heads to see whether our communication has done a difference.
And most of the time, companies use surveys for this, offline, on paper, or online. But today, we don't want to talk about surveys, but a different tool that can bring extremely interesting insights. But that is for some reason not on everybody's head when collecting stakeholder insights. It's focus groups. Many companies seem to be hesitant to use focus groups. Some feel that they are too costly and labor intense. Others shy away from them because the moderation of a focus group can be tricky, especially when anyone expects unbiased feedbacks.
Yeah, and because of this, we invited a special guest to this podcast today. We have invited Phil Riggins to join our show today. Phil, you are a specialist in brand and reputation management and a recognized expert in opinion research with more than 25 years of experience building and leading insight teams in Europe and the US at international agencies such as Brunswick, APCO, and Weber Shandwick, right? Hello,
Yes.
Phil.
Hi, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about some of the things that I find really interesting and exciting, so thank you.
Let me say a few words more about your CV. You started your own companies 2 years ago. You have worked as a partner for Brunswick for nearly 6 years, advising clients on reputation, brand, and issues management. And in addition, you are a member of the Market Research Society and the European Associations of Communications Directors. Very impressive. I would assume your days are full, right, Phil?
They are. Thanks for that, Stefan. I think one of the things that I think is important to note is if the combination of opinion research and communications is being able to really think about it from the communicator's perspective when you go in and design the research, whatever type of research you're doing. So that's why when you mentioned the European Association of Communication Directors and MRS, that's, I think, an important highlight.
It's still an interesting and exciting career that you lived. What are you more, a consultant or a researcher? What is fascinating about your work?
Mark, that's a great question. I started out as an opinion researcher in the United States in Washington, D.C., doing opinion research for the Department of State on the U.S. image around the world. And then I went in the private sector, and over time, just did everything you can imagine when it comes to opinion research, but then started advising clients on what they should be doing with that information, what kinds of communications campaigns should they run, what should the message be, and got involved in political campaigns. So morphed into a consultant who uses opinion research to give advice on how to tell a story. That's basically what I do. Is I help people tell their stories in a way that people can actually hear.
Based on research.
Always based on research, and research as a broad term. So, anything from desk research to in-depth interviews to focus groups to surveys to digital analytics, everything that involves listening is what I like to think about.
Phil, there's always people here on this podcast who think about a career in research or in digital measurement, etc. And so we usually ask our guests where they're coming from. So did you study this? What do you have to do the kind of work that you did?
I studied political campaigning in the U.S. and Washington and wanted to be a campaign pollster, basically help run and win elections, but then decided that really wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to use opinion research to inform government, and that's why I went into the State Department. The thing about opinion research as a career path is there's just so many different directions you can go. I was thinking about how, before this interview, how there's a difference between market research and issues management research, which is where I tend to focus, is helping clients, organizations understand the issues that affect them. Very rarely do I get involved in consumer campaigns where you're trying to push a product. It's usually you're trying to push an idea.
So Phil, you are conducting focus groups since many, many years. Can you say a few words about what focus groups are and how they fit into the toolbox of all the other measurement tools that you have to play with as a communicator these days?
Sure. So as we all know, there's qualitative and quantitative research, and focus groups are qualitative in that they tend to be small numbers and more about exploration and getting in to really understand not only what people think, but how and why they think the way they do. So they tend to be about 6 to 10 people in a group setting around a table in a living room. It can be done just about anywhere, but you're listening to them. You have a discussion guide, kind of like this interview where we have questions, but we really want to follow the conversation. And so you'll kick things off and get people going, and then follow the conversation where it goes and just pursuing different themes. And the goal is to really understand the range of opinions that people have about a particular issue or topic and the depth of those feelings around them. So it's a very good exploratory tool. And then you can also test out people's reactions to ideas or content and probe around, well, why did you react the way you did? They're very interactive. They're very open-ended. The way they fit into the whole suite of tools depends on people's approach, but I take a qual-quant approach where I believe qualitative research is helpful at the front end of thinking for an organization, a company, on whatever they're trying to do. So you really just want to get out there, talk to a few people, sort out what's going on in their heads, what might be some of the pitfalls we could fall into. And then you might want to turn those findings into a quantitative assessment of how widespread are those views in the population of interest. So qual first to really explore, quant to validate what we see in those focus groups. Actually, does that play out in the wider population, or was it just noise? They're extremely useful. Sometimes people use them after quantitative to kind of pursue ideas that they saw in a survey. Well, why did they say this? Why did they think that we were going in this direction when we're actually going in this direction? So organizations will use focus groups to dig deeper, either in general or with a subgroup. They might have done some subgroup analysis in the quant and see that, women who are between the ages of 18 and 29 have a completely different view. And why is that? So let's get together some focus groups with them and find out.
Let's explain the results we saw and dig in deeper into the how and the why they answered like this.
Exactly. As I said, to me, they have much more value at the front end, because if you're thinking about a communications campaign, you've got some ideas, we think this would be great. Let's go this direction. It may or may not be a good idea. I can't tell you over the years, working with really good communicators who come up with this campaign and then they want to go to run it. And we're like, well, maybe you might want to do a couple of focus groups to test out your ideas. And they're like, no. You convince them, they do the test, and the focus group participants destroy it. They destroy the idea. What's amazing about focus groups and especially with consumers is they have a lot of common sense that we as consultants, and we're very smart people, we overthink things sometimes and we get too cute. focus groups allow you to, if you're especially at the consumer level, to get that reality check. And so they destroy it. But then you can go back and say, well, actually, why did that not work? What might work? And you end up coming out with ideas that you never would have thought of, terminology or language that is actually much more effective with your audience.
Okay, but is it difficult to select the right people to join these focus groups? How do you proceed there?
It can be. I mean, I've done focus groups with consumers and with farmers in Montana in a steakhouse. I've done focus groups with central bankers in Prague, seriously, for the Department of Treasury. It's all about understanding who is it that matters to the success of what we're trying to do. Who do we need support from in order to do X? It's kind of like ordering a pizza in some respects, because I'd like to have 18 consumers who are, with this flavor, and then a couple doctors or, executives over here. So consumers, it's very much about, you pay them a certain amount of money. It's usually not that much. Doctors, for example, they take money as well, believe me, but it's much more. And then for executives or other decision leaders, you have to offer them something that's not monetary, but much more like information or the opportunity to network with people at their level. So that's the bait that you use to get them into the room.
Phil, you already gave some good examples, some interesting examples of where you can use focus groups. Could you give us, and I know, you have confidentiality agreements, but just an example about where a client had a problem and you solved it with a focus group, or you produced some interesting insights?
I can give you one. It's a few years old now, but I think it's a classic example where it was an alcohol company, and I won't mention their name, but they had a product that was like a frozen daiquiri, and it captured 14% of the market share, and it had been there for years. It just was not moving. And the marketing team came up with an idea for repackaging it in a new package that would, they felt, and it tested really well with consumers in their consumer focus groups, and they felt it would boost their market share. And the legal team at the company found out what they were doing and got really worried, because the packaging that they chose was the same that's used for Capri Sun children's drink. You might be familiar with it. It's like in a little silver triangle package.
Yeah.
And so they thought, we'll put this frozen daiquiri in there. And the legal team was really nervous about it. Somebody needed to win the argument. And so we used the focus groups as a way to decide how were stakeholders like community leaders, politicians, the media, how were they likely to react if the company went to market with this new packaging. And so in the focus group facility, I was in the room doing the moderation, and in the back room on one side was the legal team, the other side of the room, marketing team, each wanting their side of the argument to win. And we didn't just say, put the package on the table and say, what do you think? We kind of walked into it by showing them different products that could be confused. So root beer in a root beer bottle, beer in a beer bottle, and other kinds of products that people might get confused. And then we had Capri Sun and this frozen daiquiri in the mocked up packaging. And instantly people were like, you're going to have Mothers Against Drunk Drivers coming after you. You're going to get a boycott. And the argument was over. So by just doing a couple focus groups, they solved them. They avoided falling into this big hole and having a big reputation crisis, basically.
That's a very interesting example, because I think we all know these consumer focus groups, right? Where there's people on the street and when you are out shopping and they invite you to, I don't know, test a new product and give your opinion about this. This is something that most people know, but like using focus groups to really solve these legal issues, that has saved the company a lot of money and a lot of hassle, I would assume.
Yes, absolutely. I've done that for other companies where they had issues. One I can talk about that's in the public domain was, you might remember a few years ago, eBay was having an issue with luxury goods being sold on their platform that were counterfeit. And so they were being pursued by Louis Vuitton and other luxury good manufacturers as, not doing enough to stop this practice. And so what we did was we did focus groups with policymakers in Brussels and consumers and other opinion leaders in France and Germany and the UK to understand, what people knew about it, what did they think about it, and what did they expect from the company, from eBay, and came up with a really good campaign around basically, look, we're doing everything we can, which were all the things that came out of the research and were the things that would satisfy consumer and stakeholder expectations. So it was a very good way to understand, what do the people that we need support from, what do they expect from us in order for them to give us our support. And it solved the whole problem. Basically, the problem went away because they were doing everything they could possibly do. They just weren't communicating it in an effective way.
Interesting. Phil, can you tell us a bit more about how these focus groups are being structured? Obviously, you look at the issue and then you develop an approach for this certain problem in this focus group, but how does it usually work? Do you have a warm-up session first? Do everybody say who he is, or how does it work?
Okay, so you have to think about focus groups as you've got people coming into a room for an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. You need them to say what they really think, and so there's a couple things. One, a good moderator understands their own biases and checks them at the door. You have to create a space where people feel comfortable saying things that are uncomfortable or not politically correct or just kind of rude. So you have to create that space. And you also want people to feel that they're part of a community. So you warm them up and you ask a couple questions, and you go around the room, and you might do it either just one by one or in a popcorn fashion where you ask people just to volunteer, but just ask them, tell me your first name, what you do during the day, and what you like to do on the weekends. And so people then will kind of go through that exercise, and that takes about 5 minutes. And then everybody kind of has spoken as well. So there's that other thing. And one of the things I always do is, look, some people in focus groups like to talk a lot, and other people like to sit back and be quiet. And I may at some point ask some people to sit back and be quiet and other people to join in the conversation. And if I do either of those, don't take it personally, because it's just me doing my job. You have to, as a moderator, kind of set the framework that this conversation is going to go on, and then kind of turn it loose. And the questions that you ask, you have a guide, and there are questions and there are themes that you need to work through, but it has to be open-ended, and you have to kind of follow the strand of the conversation, because that's where the learnings come from, the insights. You have to listen for people saying something that is unexpected, and then realize that that's interesting, and then go for it and pursue it, and then check the room to see if other people have a similar view, different view, and kind of like get a sense of, well, is that, how interesting or relevant is that to what we're trying to do? And you can come out with really amazing insights that can turn things around for clients.
Thanks for these insights. I was thinking, how difficult is it from a moderator role? He is open-minded. He's always listening to get his side not so biased in these discussions and to talk with these people.
It's not, I was going to say it's not easy, but it's not hard either. I mean, I've worked with people that were moderators and been in the back room while they were doing the moderation. Sometimes there are lots of moderators that are a lot better than I am, and there are others that I was just shocked because they're doing what we call leading the witness. They're basically, is it true that you think X? And I'm just like, oh my God, what kind of moderation is that? I did focus groups in Louisiana one time where this shipbuilder was bringing in welders from India who were very skilled welders at a very high level. And the local community was outraged because they were bringing in these foreigners to do their jobs, take their jobs away at the shipyard. And so I was speaking with people in the community who were extremely racist and saying, in the focus group, you would not believe what people were saying. But I had to sit there and just go, oh, that's really interesting. Does anybody have a similar or a different view? And it was hard, to be honest, but my job was to keep that smile on my face and keep people open-minded. And so I had to stay open-minded. Honestly, I feel so lucky in this occupation that I get paid to learn and to meet people that have different worldviews. I'm very lucky.
Phil, looking at a situation like this, do you feel it is an advantage being an external moderator, or would you say, hey, if a company has a well-trained internal moderator, why not? So is there like this internal, external, what would you say?
I would say, why? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to save money? I think it's the benefit of an external moderator is you don't need to know everything about the client, that's actually can be harmful. You need to be able to learn quickly about the client, and you bring that expertise to this problem, and you can see things in a different way than an internal person could. So I just don't even know why you'd want to do that.
I also had this feeling that an external moderator can really bring something to this, because everybody knows he's impartial, because he's an external. He doesn't have to make a decision after the focus group in any way. So I think there's a lot of advantages for using somebody external.
I think also he's objective.
Absolutely.
He's not included in all this discussion in the company, or he's not included in project or product development or something like this.
And because you're an outsider, you can say things that are not politically correct in the organization, because I don't want to lose my job. So I'm going to say what they want me to say. I know there aren't that many people that would do that, but that's a concern.
In these times, in these Corona times, or in these virtual meeting times that we are all going through, what do you think? Is it essential to be in one room all together to have these good results out of these focus groups?
I'll be honest with you. I used to be so anti-online focus groups, but over time, and especially now, I just think they're great. I think, they're just a huge plus in this time that we're in. And there's so many ways to do it. People are comfortable with the technology, and it's come a long way in 10 years. So it's exciting. And I think there are trade-offs in everything. And I don't think you can get into some of the depth that you can get into when you have somebody in a room with you and you can look into their eyes and actually see that they're nervous or that they want to say something. But there's just so much you can do online right now. And so many tools. You've got tools like, everything from Google Hangout to there's so many platforms to do online focus groups. Plus, you combine that with other tools they have for workshops like Miro and Mural, and you can do whatever you want. You can create very interesting and powerful sessions.
And there's even sessions, Phil, where people are typing their answers, right? It's not just phone calls or video conversations. There's also these focus groups where people type their answers.
Yeah. So, when it comes to online, you've got synchronous and asynchronous. So where synchronous is happening in real time and asynchronous it's kind of like a bulletin board. And the bulletin board one, that's just you post a question and people respond to it. They may not understand the question correctly, but you can collect information over a week or 2 weeks, and people can do it when they want. The synchronous ones, you're doing it in real time. People are logging in from anywhere in the world, just about, and you can do it a combination of video where you're asking questions. They can do sidebar projects and take little polls or answer questions and type in stuff. It's very flexible that way.
So it depends on the topic that you want to know, how you organize and how you guide these focus groups.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So you can guide them directly. Even with Zoom now, I think Zoom is becoming more popular in general. But for focus groups, it's very easy to get 8 people into that room, into a Zoom room, to talk about an issue. I think the qualities of a good moderator matter still in that environment, because you can warm people up, make them kind of talk a little bit each of them so that they get to know each other online. And they may be a little bit more inhibited to say because they know they're being recorded, but it's still good. It's still really good. So in a normal focus group where you've got people around the table, there's a one-way mirror usually in the room, and there's a video camera in the room, and then there's people behind the mirror watching the conversation. You tell that to the people at the beginning of the focus group, and then within 2 minutes they forgot it, and they'll say the most amazing, sometimes ridiculous and outrageous things, which I don't think would happen as much in Zoom or in Google Hangout, because people can see that they're online and realize they're being recorded the whole time.
I would like to go back to another topic that we already discussed, but I think it's interesting to have another angle on it. And this is how you put together the people, the group of people that you're going to involve in the focus group. So you could create a focus group that is more homogeneous, where people have the same opinion. And there could be value in having a focus group like that if you want to dive into a topic. Or you could have a focus group where you have people with very different opinions and there's almost a fight in the room. Does it depend on the problem what you do, or is there a golden way there?
I think you said it. It depends on the problem that you're trying to solve. But so normally you would segment people based around their demographics or their attitude about a particular question, or their behaviors, because you're trying to kind of dig deep into that. It's often the case where you want to mix it up a little bit. And to be quite honest, clients do that too because they don't have a lot of budget. So they look, can't we just mix the people in the room, and we know who kind of has this particular attitude, so we'll analyze that later. But let's mix it up. And I prefer, if possible, to segment it out so that you get clear guidance on this segment of the population feels this way, that feels that way. But you can end up doing 12, 20 groups, and that gets really expensive. So I appreciate it. And you're always looking for the happy median. You want the median where people are, you're balancing the quality of the output with resources available.
You still have to know that it's qualitative research, and we normally have just a few cases. Can we make good conclusions out of these few voices? Are they representative? What is your answer there?
It's a great question, Mark. It depends on the situation. So if you're making a decision on a multi-million euro campaign that's going to go all across Europe, you don't want to base it on just a few focus groups. So you would definitely do the qualitative to get the design right and the message right. And I would always advise doing quantitative to validate what you saw, to make sure that it's going to work. Yeah. At the same time, I cannot tell you how many times I have done one focus group and then followed that up with a survey, and then the results have both matched almost perfectly. It's interesting how reflective of the view of the public or of a population, whatever it happens to be, can actually be with just a few focus groups.
Yeah, this is my experience too. But I think these are 15, 20 people.
Yeah, maybe. Even maybe it's 8. You just need to get a reality check or a disaster check. Let's make sure that it's going to not fall flat. So, and get people to stress test it a little bit. That's an appropriate situation for just doing a few groups. But, I would not always, but most of the time recommend qual then quant.
Interesting, Phil. I mean, we could probably talk for another few hours. You have so many examples and funny experiences and interesting experiences probably from your time.
Oh yeah.
But I think we have to come to an end. So there's one question that we like to ask our guests, and this is to help our listeners to really argue when they're in their company, if they see there is a problem that we should solve with the focus group. So let's assume you're in the building of one of your biggest clients, and you're stepping into the elevator, and now the CEO comes in of this company, tells you about the problem, and you feel, hey, focus groups would be exactly what you need to solve this. How would you pitch it to him? Let's assume you have like 3 levels of time to pitch it. What would you say?
Okay, the first thing that came to mind was, I was going to say, how lucky do you feel? But that's not advice. So basically, how important is this? How well do you feel you understand your audience and their view of you in this situation? Do you know what language they use to actually talk about this issue? Because they may or may not share your worldview. So, Mr. or Mrs. CEO or Ms. CEO, there are 2 views of reality: yours, how you see the situation, and theirs, how they see the situation, and they often don't match up. There's a disconnect between your view and their view, and in focus groups, what you can do is you can gauge the degree to which those 2 views of reality are in alignment or disconnected, and learn how to close the gap. That's as simple as that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Phil, that was very interesting, and I have the feeling we will not have you for the last time on our show, so we would be very happy if we could invite you again in the future,
happy to do that.
Maybe on some other very interesting topics that you're doing. Thank you very much for now.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Phil, for being into our show. Great to discuss this topic with you.
We will make sure that there is some additional material on our website, measurementmashup.de. And of course, I hope you will listen into our podcast the next time, the podcast on data-driven decision in communications. Stay tuned.